Okay, yeah, good evening. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm doing an artist talk with Mitchell F. Chan. He's based in Toronto, Canada, and he's best known for creating one of the earliest non-fungible token projects, Digital Zones. We're going to speak about that soon. And Mitchell is super well known, in the NFT space for being part of FingerprintsDAO. I think you even founded it, right?
No, I did not. I was just one of the early artists collected into the DAO.
I made you the founder of FingerprintsDAO. So, and he hosts a beautiful Twitter space series, talk series, which I always enjoy listening to. You're an essayist, you're basically a lot of things, and currently you're working on a game, which I'm super excited to speak with you about. So yeah, let's get started. When did you know you want to be an artist?
I actually studied to be an architect. I was at architecture school at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, and I came to understand architecture there as being less about concrete and bricks and walls and doors and more about people. And for me, architecture was thinking about how people interact with the environment and trying to make interventions, right? Trying to use people's actions as a material. You were essentially trying to mold it as an architect. One of the problems with architecture is that the process of making a building is a really inefficient way to be working with people as a medium. And so it was about halfway through my studies as an architect when I realized that I would probably be better served getting rid of the part of my practice that was going to be about, creating buildings, and instead focusing on art, where I would have a lot more freedom.
Okay, cool. I can hear Mitchell not that well. Do you hear him well? Because I can't really hear him. Oh, I don't. I didn't hear much of what he said.
Is this a little bit louder right now?
No, it's not you. It's the audience hears you super well, but I don't.
Oh, I see.
And that's pretty tough having a conversation then.
Yes, it is.
Can you say something?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, beautiful. Now I can hear you super well. Okay, so I didn't hear much of your answer, but I think it was...
the gist of it was that I was in architecture school, and I learned that making art was a lot more fun than making buildings.
That's great to hear. And then you got started as an artist, and I mean, now you're one of the pioneers of blockchain art, but your background is actually, you created art for physical spaces, so your background is actually conceptual art, and that's also very important when we then speak about your blockchain project. So, what were your first steps as an artist?
Sure. Well, it's funny, when you put it like that, starting as architecture and now considered more of a conceptual artist, it fits into a very convenient narrative, right? Which is that my work just became less and less and less material, right? I began in probably the most physical of media, right? Studying architecture. And, now here I am talking about, creating and selling bits of data that exist on like a decentralized blockchain network. And there were a lot of steps on the way to that. My work had been progressively dematerializing, to use sort of like an art world terminology. And for many years, actually, the way a lot of my career was dedicated to public art. So I was making large-scale sculptures in parks and plazas and things like that. Still very, very physical. But still allowing me to think about, to think about how I communicate with people and how people are going to interact with their spaces, interact with their environments. At the same time, I was doing installation works, which were becoming more and more based on technology. In the gallery or museum was where I was free to work with technology that was a little bit more delicate, and ideas that were a little bit more difficult to enter, until finally I arrived at blockchain in 2017. And it's a natural step in this progression to making work that is less and less and less material, because as my career had gone on, I started to understand my job as an artist. as being, my job was to make visible those important structures and systems in the world which are invisible. And the technique that I came to prefer was, if you're trying to talk about something that is all around you in the world, whether you're talking about an economic system or a social system or whatever, the best way to aestheticize that is to make something that is almost visible. And so, in 2016, my sculptures were looking like this. They were sculptures that were made entirely out of clouds and water vapor. This was an attempt for me to visualize social media, the ways that we interact with each other online. Essentially, these sort of adversarial, like these systems, these platforms are set up to be adversarial, and there's no requirement for real content in them. And so this was the work I was doing in 2016, and it was really natural for me that the next step would be to be interested in economic systems. And you can see in here, I'm an artist who uses technology, a wide variety of different technologies. Some of it is physical, like electronics, circuits, pneumatics, robotics, things like that. All of that is in play in this piece. So it was natural for me to realize that, okay, if this Ethereum blockchain an artist can manipulate it, I can write code, therefore I can use it as an art medium, and it would be the perfect medium for talking about economic systems and processes of commodification. And that's how I ended up at blockchain. It was just the next stop on the road to dematerialization.
And then you did your Digital Zones project, which is based also on a very well-known concept piece from the 60s, right? You're going to speak about that soon. I mean, the interesting part is, you're one of the pioneers in the field. You got started very early on. You're well known for that piece, but it's also quite tricky, I think, for someone who hasn't heard of it to actually learn about it, because there's not that much to see.
Sure, yeah, it's very invisible, right? It's continuing. Yeah. It's continuing to be it's continuing on the step to immateriality. Sure, so I can give a little bit of background on that piece, right? So, like I said, I'm interested in these invisible phenomena that happen that radically change our relationship to things that are definitely real. Okay, and one of the invisible things that happens that changes our relationship to objects is ownership, the notion of ownership. And ownership can exist on a number of different levels, right? Of course, the legal property level. We know that I own, this house or this product or whatever it may be. But there's a different type of sort of spiritual, moral, intrinsic ownership. And I know it to be true because I have experienced it, that a sense of ownership drastically changes how we feel about something. When I looked at blockchain, right, it is a platform that is able to make ownership absolute and undeniable without necessarily any physical presence, without the presence of physical paperwork, like there's no legal document. And the things that you can own are things that also do not have to be physical. This makes sense. A completely dematerialized system for recording ownership made sense for me in a world where the assets that we care about were increasingly immaterial. This was true in the entertainment world around us. For instance, songs, our MP3 collections, the media that we own, whether they're video games that I download from the PlayStation Store or whatever. But it was also true in art, right? And art has been on this also been on a trend toward dematerialization, or at least one strand of art has been trending towards dematerialization for over half a century. And I'm really interested in looking back at art history to figure out what it might have to say about this issue. And of course, the artwork I discover that I think is the best analogy, the best tool that we have for understanding what it means to live in a world of immaterial ownership, is Yves Klein and his project, The Zones of Immaterial Pictorial Sensibility. Now, a little bit of background on that project for people who don't know. I suspect that most people will be familiar with Yves Klein for his blue monochromes. And what I think a lot of people don't realize was that though Yves Klein is famous for this paint that he made, this color of blue, he patented, this color. It was a special process with a special binding resin, et cetera, et cetera. The physical presence of these paintings, he always found problematic. Because Yves Klein's stated goal, the goal that he stated throughout his career, was to create art that was pure sensation, right? And the physical presence of these paintings, he tried everything to get around the fact that they were physical things. He would hang them on these mounts that stuck off the wall by like 6 inches so that it would read less like just a plane on a gallery wall. And of course, he had that dazzling blue, that blue that was so flat that if you stare at it, you lose yourself, right? You forget that you're looking at a picture plane. You could be looking at infinite depth, right? That is how flat the blue is. And so he's always trying to subvert the physical presence of this, but he can never quite do it. Until in 1958, he has this idea, and he exhibits it for the first time on his 30th birthday, a new kind of exhibition. And people line up on the streets outside Galerie Iris Claire in Paris, all right, for this new exhibition that he's called The Void. And as they approach the gallery, the windows are blocked off by a blue curtain. There's a blue curtain over the doors, and people enter, and the gallery is completely empty. There is nothing in it, not even the color blue. And what Klein claims is that this gallery was imbued with the sensibility of the color blue, right? This hue that had become his signature, that is and still is synonymous with him. And the way that he put it, he said that he has solved the problematics of art. There is no longer any physical medium that is an imperfect translation of his desire. And artwork really is just the transference of a sensibility, of a feeling, an emotional state, an idea between an artist and a viewer or a collector. So there's nothing there. These are essentially invisible artworks, right? But Klein is really, besides being just a brilliant showman who could set up these extravagant, like these sensational events, and the media had a field day with it. It was in the newspaper. They said, Klein sells the wind, etc. He's also, and despite being very mystical, right? Like he's a very, very spiritual person, but he's also a realist and a pragmatist. And he understands how the vulgarities of the art world and the vulgarities of commercialization have an effect on the real, profound, and spiritual elements of his work. And he understands that owning a work and being able to buy it affects how people will perceive it. So Klein says that these immaterial artworks that he's created are for sale. And this is a radical idea. You buy these invisible artworks, this makes no sense. But he's really smart. This is not a scam. He's really thinking about what it would mean to own something that had no physical aspect. And so as though to highlight the fact that these artworks are really just an immaterial sensibility, he wants to accept payment for his artwork in the most material of currencies, which is gold. So he accepts payment only in solid gold. And some people do this, right? They pay a certain amount of gold in exchange for these invisible artworks. And in exchange, they get something. They get a receipt, a numbered receipt. Okay, so it says, it's numbered, so it says specifically which invisible zone of space you own, and it indicates that you definitely own this, right? So he's really playing with the idea that ownership is something that exists on one level, on our very temporal, earthly level, and that an artwork is something that can exist on a different transcendental level. But there was one more step that he wanted to take, because he believes that ownership, like artwork, can also exist on a transcendental level. But it will require making some sacrifices. Klein says that, you hand over this gold, all right, you hand over this gold, you get your receipt, and then you own it, you legally own it. And of course, this receipt now, if you'd held on to it, it would be worth a lot of money. One just sold in an auction at Sotheby's last, I think, October or November for something like €1 million. But he says, if you want to really own it, you can participate in this ritual. And he says, you can meet me at the River Seine and bring your receipt. Again, this thing that now would be worth €1 million, and you burn the receipt. And I will relinquish half of my gold into the river. I will throw the gold into the river. And by releasing these physical these physical shackles, you truly own the artwork. It truly is a part of you, right? And that is a metaphysical, sort of spiritual level ownership of a very spiritual work. So that was the story. You know, like most people in 2017, I'm most familiar with Klein through the monochromes. I unfairly and incorrectly tend to lump him more in with the minimalists than the conceptualists. And I am going deep into this work, and I'm blown away. Like, it's an incredibly important artwork that, you know, I felt like was sadly overlooked whenever we consider Klein in the textbooks. I also realized that this is a perfect model for what we're talking about if art ever were to be bought and sold on blockchain, right? Because, and this is 2017, so the term NFT does not exist yet, all right? I've never heard that term, all right? But I am thinking, and nobody is buying and selling art on blockchain that I know of. Of course, Anika, you and I both know there were some pioneers who had been working, trying to sell art on blockchain before this. They were brilliant. And I was an idiot because I didn't know about their work. I'm just thinking, like, what if this ever happens? And I think this is a great, this is the model. And I said, okay, so he had these paper receipts. These were like tokens. And these tokens are not the artwork. They are simply just records that you own an artwork that can exist on some other level. And I realized what's really happening here is, you know, you're taking an artwork and you're separating out the commodity form from the art form, from that we experienced. And we're letting them be two different things. And implicit in this is, one, an acknowledgement that being able to own an artwork is important. Okay, ownership does change our perception of things. But it's inconvenient that the thing you own is the same as the thing that you experience. It means that the kind of art experiences we make are kind of limited by like what you can buy and sell. And of course, like, it's no accident that most of the artwork, you know, that hangs in museums that we see in exhibitions are paintings, because the painting is an experienced form that's really easy to trade and buy and sell. I can put it in your storage locker, I can put it on your wall, etc., right? When you separate those things, your certificate is just a perfect commodity form, and then your art form can be anything. And in Klein's case, it can even be nothing. I think this is also a really interesting way of thinking about crypto, that, you know, these crypto tokens, whether it's Ether or Bitcoins or whatever, these are tokens that link to some sort of sensibility that exists not part of any server. It's not part of any technology. There are no bits that record it, right? Bitcoin is a promise. It is a shared belief in value. And, you know, what exists on the chain is only a record of it. So I think that Klein's zones were a brilliant metaphor for crypto. So what I did was I, you know, looked at all of Klein's notes on exactly how his zones should be bought, sold, and transferred. And I translated those instructions into Solidity code. And in that, I made, you know, these tokens that were exactly like Klein's receipts. They were numbered, so you knew exactly which one you were getting, aka non-fungible, though that wasn't a term that we were using. And, you know, there was a promise that they were linked to a sensibility of a color, which I described in this 33-page essay that I wrote that kind of expanded on all of these ideas, and was published along with the code repo. And that was 2017, and in August I presented it at Interaccess Media Art Center here in Toronto, and minted the first one.
And then, I mean, that's the interesting part, what happened then?
No, the interesting part,
you need to speak about it, I guess. And
yeah,
then
so
what happened back then, and what happened when the hype started?
Yeah, so what happened then is actually less interesting, because what happened then is nothing, right? I put all this, I was super excited about these ideas because it was just like, I saw blockchain as like a perfect continuation of conceptual artists' thoughts, right? And I also saw it as an opportunity, as a medium for artists who were working in immaterial practices. So I presented at a great media art center, at a great artist center in Toronto. And, I minted the first one in front of a room packed full of people. And then nothing happened. People just people just didn't get it. I may have made the mistake that I was trying to present to art world people and teach them about how crypto relates to conceptual art. And that message just was not getting across. And it also, might be my fault. I didn't have a huge following or anything like that. So it just kind of sat there, right? And then NFTs take off. And as NFTs take off, and we're around, this crazy hype cycle, and there's Beeple, and there's Pack, and Folia is starting to happen, and all of this stuff, right? Of course, people are going through the blockchain looking for the earliest NFTs, thinking that those are going to be valuable. And, it wasn't I'd done a little bit of work, talking to people who are interested in historical NFTs, letting them know about my project, because I thought people would be interested in it. And the people who found it, people did find it, and they became really passionate about it. And it turned out that while I didn't have much success talking to art people and trying to convince them that blockchain and crypto was an extension of art ideas, I had a lot of success talking to crypto people and telling them that conceptual art is a really great way to understand crypto, that conceptual art is a great lens for thinking about crypto, as opposed to crypto being a lens for thinking about conceptual art. People weren't interested in that idea. So people found it, and then the piece started to sell out. And it started to sell out really, really fast. I would release the tokens in batches of 10, and they would sell out in 4 minutes, 2 minutes, 90 seconds by the end, until finally all 101 tokens in here were sold out. And and then they the secondary market exploded, and then it sort of reached its peak with one of these being sold in an auction at Sotheby's, for 8 figures, which was mind blowing. I was really proud that it sort of brought some attention to Yves Klein and his practice. I was able to work with the Yves Klein Foundation, and I produced an essay for some auctions, for an auction of an Yves Klein piece at Sotheby's, and yeah, it went pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting story, but also maybe a story for artists. If your project doesn't work, maybe at some point, don't worry, you might become a millionaire later and recognized for your art. Maybe it takes some years. The highest sale was it something like 2 million, or what was it exactly?
I think it was maybe 1.5.
Not bad for not selling at all in the beginning, I would say.
Yeah.
And from what I've seen in your presentation, I think you also brought some example from, have I seen Rhea in there, or was it something else? Because you've mentioned the other pioneers next to you, Rhea Myers, Kevin A. Bosch, he was also here with me on the Herbert W. Franco panel. I mean, it's quite interesting that most of the pioneers in the blockchain, using blockchain as a medium, they have a background in concept art, and I'm still waiting for a museum, in case a museum hears it, to curate a group show, and showing the parallels and also the art historical part, concept art, and then the references and artists using blockchain as a medium. I'd really love to see that. Would you briefly like to speak about what your thoughts are, about the whole? Maybe I don't know if it's a group of you, but were you connected back then, by the way? I mean, did you know each other?
No.
And were speaking? I know that Kevin and you you've never spoken, I think, so it's quite interesting. There seems to be, how did that happen? You never spoke, but all of you did it.
No, I mean, it was, because it was, an idea that was out there in the air. Yeah, I always say that it's to my great discredit that I didn't discover, that I didn't discover Rhea Myers' work, that I didn't discover Kevin Abish's work, that I didn't discover Jonas's work at that time. I have this really bad habit as an artist when I'm working on something. As soon as I start work, as soon as an idea grabs hold of my mind, I put on blinders, and I just have to have my nose right to the paper or right to the screen and just work on it. And I think it's maybe a feeling that other people can relate to, is because there's nothing more discouraging whenever you're working on this idea that you think is like really new and exciting to you. You know, someone will come and say, oh, have you ever seen like so-and-so doing something that is, you know, so very, very similar? It can be so deflating. And I always learned that, like, you know, not to worry if there are precedents to your work, to an idea that you came by honestly. You know, if you came by an idea honestly, you weren't trying to copy anybody, you should always just keep on working on it, even if you discover that somebody has done something different. Because if you sort of keep working in good faith from your own perspective, you know, you will be adding to a conversation, right? You're not going to be, you know, ripping somebody off or anything like that. But as the safeguard against that, when I start working on something, like, I don't want to see other precedents, like, because I'll get all self-conscious and I'll get all nervous and things like that, and I'm afraid people will be mad at me. But it's such a bad instinct. And I think now that I'm older, now that I'm 5 years older, you know, I have more confidence. It doesn't, if I see similar work, I will, you know, I will go and seek it out and talk to people who have done it, and I'll have more confidence that I, you know, won't be perceived as a fraud or anything like that. But yeah, it was so bad that I didn't know those people in 2017. But I've made up for lost time since, and I've been extremely grateful. And connecting to that group of brilliant artists has like actually been the highlight of the last 2 years of my life.
Yeah, we also met, I think, exactly 1 year ago at a castle in Prague.
Yeah.
And we had the time of our life. I think it was
exactly a year ago.
Yeah, it was exactly a year ago. So speaking about other people, I mean, what I found really interesting, instead of putting out a lot of work when the hype happened and there was so much attention on the NFT space, you decided basically sort of to take a break because you said in an interview you didn't trust yourself if you would put out work just to make money during the hype when there was a lot of attention. So you decided not to release any work. I think you've just done one Art Blocks drop last year, right?
Yeah, and the Art Blocks drop I started like long before the hype. Like I started that Art Blocks piece and like submitted it to Art Blocks. I mean, it was before Art Blocks were selling for millions of dollars. Like it was so early that I could just like be on Discord like chatting with Snowfro like about some ideas. Like he had that amount of time, you know, which he doesn't anymore. But yeah, look, I didn't take a break because I have been working, you know, every day on new projects, and I love my work, and I'm so happy about it. I try to be, like Klein, very honest and realistic about the effect that money and commodification has on art and how we perceive it. All right, I accept this. I'm not like you know. I believe in my artwork and the artwork of my fellow artists. I believe that it comes from, you know, a genuine place of curiosity. However, I also know that nobody is immune to like the seduction of the market. I mean, when things are going so crazy, like you can't help but look at things differently. I know this to be true. And so I'm really lucky. Like obviously, although I'm pragmatic and I try to be honest about it, it's still difficult and awkward for me to talk about the money part. And I try to get better at it because it's important and I just want to be honest with people, you know, but it's still awkward, you know, for me to come and say, oh yeah, and this thing sold for $1 million. Like I still feel weird about that, but it's the truth is what happened and I should just deal with it. But it was like, I'm lucky that all this happened when, you know, later on in my life, you know, I mean, I'm not that old, but I'm 39 right now. I'm going to be 40 and I have a pretty confident sense of who I am. And, you know, I spent most of my adult life as an honest to goodness working middle class artist. You know, before this happened, I was in public art. I would do my commercial gallery work, never sold so well, but I was always able to make a living doing big sculptures, many of which I'm really proud of, many of which, make no mistake, you know, I did them for the money and they're not that good because the client interfered. It was the client's fault and made some of them not that good with their dumb suggestions or whatever. But, you know, I was a proper middle-class artist, and there's nothing that can happen in my career that I'll be more proud of than that. because, that's not luck. Like, that's grinding. Maybe the big star curator comes and chooses you, but maybe they don't. So working for it was really great. But when all this stuff happened, I realized, like, all I'd ever wanted in, my life was the ability to make the work that I was passionate about, that I wanted to make, without interruption or interference. And, when I had this financial success, I recognized, okay, I can go and keep myself on a treadmill and try to make a whole bunch more money and get while the getting's good. Or I can, like, actually live the dream and just work on projects that I'm passionate about and not worry about it. And that's what I've chosen to do.
I just wrote down, because I'll tweet it later, I was a middle-class artist. That's so good. I love it.
Yeah, and I really mean it. There's nothing I'll be more proud of than that. Like, if you've achieved that, you're doing better than 95% of the people who have ever tried to be an artist, and what you've achieved has nothing to do with luck,
And now you're working on a new, it's a metaverse thing, it's a game, and you work, and this piece is exactly about the topic, right? About selling, about value, about sort of like turning yourself into a currency. We met I think 3 months ago at another NFT event in Berlin, and you were so kind. Oh, yeah, that's what I just wanted to ask you. Did you bring it?
Yeah.
Excellent. So this is a preview, right? A real preview.
Yeah. These are just screen grabs from my latest project. And again, let's continue to talk about this theme of dematerialization, okay? Because the conceptualist's idea of dematerializing the artwork, of artworks that were just processes or that just were ideas that would maybe have no fixed form. These ideas of the conceptualists can really help us make sense of the increasingly virtual world that we are living in. They can help us make sense of whatever this metaverse may be, all right? Because we're going to be dealing with the same ideas, right? Experiences that have no fixed form because they are completely interactive, because, metaverses, right, are simply sets of conditions in which, like, we can see, a user's will or a creator's will in conflict with each other or collaborating with each other. So these ideas are really important. And I think that in particular, conceptualists who are also willing to be really, really honest about how those ideas would be commodified, all right, and fit inside of capitalism, those artist ideas are extremely, extremely important here. All right, conceptualists who really tried to talk about how they were escaping capitalism this way and really believed it, I think their ideas are less valid because that didn't work out. And so the project that I'm working on now is about, very consciously dematerializing more and more and more of the art experience in order to take control over it, taking creative control over it as an artist. So I just made the decision that, not only do I want my artworks to be immaterial, but I want more of how they're experienced, more of the context to exist virtually so that I have control over it. And so, these projects are taking a long time. I've been working for, well over a year to create these pieces. And I don't think people will see any finished work until December, probably. And the idea is that, I want my artwork to exist in, much like what Jonas showed us, contexts that exist sort of like, that feel like a game. Because in those contexts, I can have total control over camera angles, dialogue. I can put didactic texts for my work, into the game and let people discover them through different interactions. You talked about, when is a museum going to come and make this group show that shows all of us artists who are talking about, conceptualism and blockchain, 5 years ago. Anika, I have no idea when that museum curator is going to come around, but I am pretty sick of waiting for them. And I realized everybody has a laptop, and I will just make an immersive experience where I can present that. And I will present that in a way that is more interesting than reading a whole bunch of texts on a wall in a big white box and putting on a set of headphones to stand in front of a tiny screen,
Did you also bring I think that people had to play, right? The trailer thing, Beggars Belief. I just wanted to write down, by the way, something else you said. I mean, what's interesting, also the aesthetics part, right? I mean, when you told me you're working on a game, then I think everyone who hears from an artist they're working on a game, it's either maybe some sort of 80s game aesthetics, maybe some pixel art thing, or then something like really, I don't know, tacky, crazy figures. And what we see from you is sort of like a bit Edward Hopper style. I was quite surprised when you opened your laptop and then this came up. I was like, that's interesting. So yeah, what about the aesthetics? And then also the storyline is super interesting. It's really about values, also about PFP projects, profile picture projects like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and like basically you sort of tell the story of what happened last year, beginning with the hype, no?
Yeah, so this is so the piece that I was able to share with you, and the piece that I'll share with our audience. I'll post the URL. It's chan.gallery/beggarsbelief. Don't worry about writing it down. We'll post it somewhere. That was just a demo to really show the values and the aesthetics. On the comment of the aesthetics, I will say, I had to do a little bit of reclaiming my identity. Once I became the guy who was best known for making the NFT artwork that had no aesthetic component to it whatsoever. That was little more than an immaterial sensibility. Because I love aesthetics. I care about them a lot. And in fact, most of my work has been very, very aesthetic. You talked about game art, typically having a certain type of look or feel to it. And I just believe, again, the incredible privilege that I've been afforded to work on things for a long time and to work on it all by myself without hiring any team or anything like that means starting from the very beginning. Edward Hopper is a reference that I will welcome for the aesthetics of something like this. I was, more inspired by, a sort of maybe lesser known Canadian painter named Christopher Pratt, who had a very, similar style. But I wanted to begin I'm looking at this as the opportunity to create an overall experience. This is sort of my Bayreuth Opera House moment where, I want to design the cup holders on your chair that you sip your big gulp out of while you experience the artwork, right? So I began by designing the shaders from scratch, choosing the camera angles and things like that. And then once you really take ownership over the game, it's about we're also living in a world where game mechanics also describe pretty well the conditions that we live in. A lot of my life feels like video game fetch quests or non-stop, clicker games and stuff like that. And it makes sense to be working within that medium and then also take control of the game mechanics, really take control of every way that people can interact with your work.
Do you want to tell people when you plan to release the work? Because I think the idea, if I remember correctly, is that and it's also heavily connected to NFTs, right? So there's in-game things people can collect. I won't tell it to people, then they can play the thing online. But yeah, your idea is to release something for a period of a month, I think, and then really, yeah. Yeah,
the idea is again I am not looking to make Halo or make Skyrim. That is well beyond my scope. I don't think I could be successful in doing that. They're just tiny snippets of interactions, and they'll be released in episodes. And the first one will be released in December. And I actually can't say anything about that because to be a little bit mysterious and seductive, it is part of a larger exhibition that is, as of this moment, unannounced, but does include some of those crypto pioneers that we talked about earlier. And so maybe our moment for a group show of new work is coming soon, and we'll be able to present some new ideas on blockchain and conceptual art.
Excellent. I think, let's see if people in the room have questions for Mitchell, for you. Questions, anyone?
Please.
We have questions. 1 second. Microphone is coming.
Yeah. Thank you for your lecture. And congratulations on the millions. I was wondering, like, there have been, I mean, I'm happy about the artists who are making a lot of money, but there are also very problematic situations with tax offices. Like, for instance, one Latvian artist is accused who is making income with NFTs in money laundering, and his all assets are frozen currently. So what is your situation? I don't know where you're based, so.
Oh yeah, so I'm in Canada. I am I'm in Canada. I've also been under investigation for money laundering. It's a rite of passage. You will be under investigation for money laundering. Yeah, my bank froze my accounts for a while, which was really funny. I needed that bank account active so that I could pay my taxes and make donations to charity. And they froze that. You can get pretty far if you kind of let your defenses down and just I just talked to people at my bank. Honestly, I acknowledge that this whole situation was really weird, but look, like, here's the record. You can see everything that happened. There's a lot of evidence of like interviews and stuff like this happening, and this is all cool, and that is fine. And taxes for everything I've talked to artists in the United States and Germany, Canada, all over. Everybody eventually figures it out, and it ends up being actually not that difficult. It's the same as selling artwork. It is the same as selling artwork, and that's, just has to be your attitude. These are just artworks that I sell. It's not weird. It's not that weird.
I think that the bank freezes bank accounts happens quite often when artists are really successful with sales, then a lot of money comes in and they just freeze it. So you shouldn't be too successful as an artist, because then your bank account gets frozen if you take out the crypto and transfer it.
I would say good problems are good to have. Never do anything to avoid paying taxes. I think taxes are good. Taxes will hopefully fund the arts for other people who haven't been so lucky in NFTs yet.
Welcome. Anka Kultus has a question. The gallerist from London.
Hi, thank you very much for this insightful conversation. And I have to reformulate my question. Like, I haven't think about it very deeply, but it's about what is dematerialized in digital art and how it is dematerialized or it's not. When you gave the example, and like many people give the example of Yves Klein and his piece as a dematerialized piece of art because it's just air, for the good reasons, it's dematerialized in the sense that the artist didn't make any art with his hands or whoever. However, even air is not like dematerialized because you can liquefy air. So it is materialized even if you don't see it. But another philosophical or like a scientist question. But when people talk about NFTs and say that it is dematerialized, I always have like a red light in my head, thinking like, what is dematerialized here? Because for some reasons, I don't see it as dematerialized. I need to compare it to the Klein work and the piece certificate of authenticity. The piece of art is dematerialized. The certificate of authenticity as a piece of paper is fully materialized. It's made of wood, ink, signed. You have it in your hand, someone made it. With the NFTs, I see the parallel, because in order to have an NFT, you need heavy computers and to make the calculations and have the NFT, have the token. So when people speak about dematerialization in digital art and NFTs, like what is dematerialized, how it is dematerialized, if it is.
Yeah, okay. This is a fascinating question. I love this question. So I'm going to try to really get into this. Let's first start off by talking about different ideas of dematerialization and your assertion that, maybe air is not so much dematerialized, and that, conversely, maybe these, NFTs aren't so much dematerialized. And so, okay, I can accept this is true, then maybe we switch this to talking about authority. There's a certain level of physicality, that brings with it authority. When so for instance, you may say that, the volume of air still has some material element, and yet it's very difficult to quantify. It is unstable. If I have this empty rectangle of air, there are air particles and molecules that pass through, and I might be getting a different air every millisecond as it passes through, and which means that there's like sort of very little authority to the physicalness of it. And there needs to be one unchanging physical thing, in the case of Klein, the certificate, that allows us to feel the sense of authority, of ownership. What was interesting for me in contrasting this with blockchain is that, in blockchain, whether or not you want to believe that the blockchain is material or not, you can make the argument that it's immaterial. If you were to look and say, okay, well, if it's material, where is it? Where is it? Point to it. And you couldn't point to it. Or you could make the argument, as you do, that it is material. It uses energy to validate transactions, etc., and this makes it material. Either way, that authority that once had to exist in a physically stable certificate, that ability to grant authority has been passed to a decentralized network. The blockchain, whether it's material or not, it is certainly a different type of material. It's a material that I can't quite point to, and that now has the power of authority to designate ownership, to say, yes, you definitely own this thing or that thing or that thing, right? So that's one way that I would look at the issue of what you described. And then I think there was another thing there that I wanted to come back to, but I've lost track of it. Do you want to help put me on track?
Yes. So I can accept the idea that the void by Klein is immaterial because it exists, it's there, right? Mm-hmm. NFTs, can they exist without anything?
Okay,
in that sense, I feel them like maybe they are much more material than most people say it because they don't have it in their hand. Like,
okay.
It's not because you can't touch it that it's immaterial, right? Like, right. This is my question about the NFTs, and of course because of the footprint that many people criticize, like still.
Okay. So I got this, and let me tell you this: that from a practical perspective, I think that you can be right, about NFTs, whatever. They have a physical footprint, but from a conceptual perspective, what I'm more interested in is hopefully we can agree that even if a JPEG or an NFT is material, there are kind of different degrees of materiality, right? And this thing that has a stable physical presence, right? This mug is always this mug, is again different from, the material presence of the air contained in this volume, which is always shifting. And I think, so there still was a problem of materiality that had to be solved. And we would always in art, I think, require only art objects that had a stable physical presence could have that authority, could have the authority of being an art object that could be owned, all right, of being an art object that could be traded, right? What Klein did was he made the certificate, had a stable physical presence, and he shifted authority over to the certificate. This certificate can authoritatively denote ownership. This would liberate the artwork itself to be, even if you don't want to call it material, even if you want to say it's still material, we can say it's a different degree of materiality. Now, with NFTs, with JPEGs, the challenge with, and I think that many digital artists would tell you this, I've spoken to so many artists who were active in digital art for years and years and years before NFTs, and they would say that the JPEG images that they tried to create, they were a challenge because they had a different type of physicality. They were infinitely reproducible, all right, which authoritative, like stable physical artworks are not. And of course, you know, the bits and bytes of data of this transferred through, who knows where they were. So they were a different type of materiality. They were an unstable materiality. I'll call it immaterial, but we can hopefully agree it's at least unstable. And so authority to own this, all right, definitively, had to be transferred to something else. And the NFTs, although, you know, again, just data on a decentralized network, all of a sudden was a platform, a medium that had that authority. Does that make sense to me? Have I made sense there?
I think so, yes. And now it's like red light, overtime. You're perfectly fine. We made it. I'm sorry, I've got told we have to finish now. Or do we take another question? No, right? Small one? Okay, good. Another one.
I just have a question. Thank you for the talk. My question is very simple. Is this NFT a blessing or a curse to the digital art?
Okay. NFTs are without a doubt a blessing for a community of artists who have been making digital art, which is a field that is so important to be making art in. As our world becomes more digital, as our world becomes more technological, it is really important that artists engage with that technology so that we can understand it better, so that we can better understand the effects that it has, you know, on, you know, our mind and spirit. And the artists who were working in that field, all right, those artists who were digitally native, were having a really difficult time turning it into viable careers. And NFTs have been a blessing for a lot of those artists, and I'm grateful for it. And I'm so happy to see them doing well and finding success. NFTs also are a technology that have applications far beyond art. Okay, NFTs are essentially digital ownership that will be applied to a lot of crap, all right? Crap that is not even trying to be art. And it will create markets for it, and it will create hype for it, and it will be it'll be kind of a disaster, and it will be kind of gross. And so it's like saying, you know, is social media a blessing or is it a disaster waiting to happen? It's a little bit of both. Thankfully, it's a blessing for a small community of people that I care very deeply about. So I'm in favor.
Cool, thank you. I think that's also very nice last words. Thank you for your time, Mitchell. Thank you for being with us in Linz. And yeah.
It is such an honor to be here, and I'm so sorry that I'm on that screen and not sitting at that piano beside you. But please, anybody, if you're interested, feel free to get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to talk to people one-on-one. I have time.
Yeah, they can join you in Twitter Spaces when you host them for FingerprintsDAO.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you, and we'll be back, I think, 5 to 10 minutes break, and then operator with a keynote. Ciao, Mitchell.
Thank you, Anika.